So it's pretty rare that a new genre is created out of, a single game. We've seen it before with like Doom likes and all that sort of stuff, but the biggest genre that we've seen probably in the last sort of 15 years. Oh god, it's 15 years because when did Demon Souls come out? 2008? Something like that. Um
Sounds about right. Yeah.
yeah, that's insane to me that it's been around that long now. It's the Souls-like. There's not a better name for it. I don't really like the name Souls-like, but it's probably the best that we've got at the moment. We'll find it one day, but eh. And we've noticed really in the last sort of, I guess, 10 years that ever since really Dark Souls 1 popped off and everyone was like, this is the best thing ever. And we have a lot of Souls-like games, and sometimes they're good, sometimes they are awful. A good one is probably Neo. And Matt will agree with me there, probably, I would say. The bad one is Lords of the Fallen, which is atrocious and made me upset at PlayStation Plus for giving it to me. So, yeah,
Well, I was going to
Matt's
say
playing a game right now.
I don't think there's that many good ones. Is the thing outside of what From Software themselves make.
It's
It
just
seems to
Neo.
be a genre. It seems to be a genre that's hard to get right. uh,
Mm.
and I think that's. I mean, it is a genre that's hard to get right because it's such a precise genre, if you know what I mean. Like you need to have
Absolutely.
a very finely tuned understanding of difficulty and level design and the way that narrative's told and all of those things that you can't really just copy and paste from what From Software does and still get it right, if that makes sense. Like it's
Yeah, you can't get away with the shit they do if you're not doing it well.
yeah, it's like it's such a creative activity to make a Souls like game that goes well beyond the mechanics. Like I've played a whole bunch of Souls likes which are mechanically not wrong, but because they lack that creative side, the mechanics don't really like the game doesn't come together in a way that's particularly compelling. Like there are some examples. Hellpoint. I don't know if you played Hellpoint. Um,
What is Hellpoint?
Hellpoint was a kind of sci-fi horror one that was released. I mean, it's
No.
available on just about everything, but it just didn't work. Dolmen's another one. I don't know if you played Dolmen, but it is a kind of
Omen?
yeah, it's a kind of Cthulhu style, um, Lovecraftian style cosmos horror, and it didn't work either. There are not too many examples of developers that have really got it. Lords of the Fallen was terrible. I know some people were
Oh, it
fans
was
of.
so bad.
I think it was notable because it was probably the first attempt by a
Yeah,
developer
it
that
was the
wasn't.
first one that
Yeah,
they did.
it wasn't. It was the first one that not From Software did, and yeah, it didn't work really at all. The same developer did the Surge, and I know some people like the Surge, but it didn't really work
The
for me
Surge is
either.
okay. Surge 2 is much better because it's like not trying to be as soulsy as hard,
Right,
which I kind of
right.
appreciate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
it's fine. It's still like a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, gotcha. So yeah, I
And
mean,
the definition of an okay game.
I mean, you are right that Neo is one of the ones that got it right. I think not just for me, but a lot of people really like Neo and Neo 2. Koei Tecmo did understand, I think, the creative side of this genre, and they did a couple of things that were a bit different as well, but in a way that still worked. And yeah, they got the difficulty right, they got the narrative right, they got everything pretty much right. I mean, Neo was the reason that I got into William Adams. I didn't know anything about him before playing Neo, and then just kind of the game is obviously not a historical record, but name dropping him and kind of the vague the way that they abstracted his story got me interested in the real history of the guy. So since then, I've read books about him and gone to his gravesite in Japan and stuff. So Neo was pretty influential on me. And yeah, now I'm playing Wo Long, which is Koei Tecmo's back doing Neo, but now set in China during the Three Kingdoms era. And it's also pretty good. It's fast. You played Sekiro, right?
I actually have not played Sekiro,
You have not played
which is
Sekiro.
shocking. I know. It came
Wow.
out during a time where I had no money because I was working 4 jobs and also going to university.
Right. So Sekiro was faster, much faster. The Souls games have a pretty
Okay.
particular pace, right? Even Bloodborne, which was itself a bit faster than Dark Souls, but
Oh, Bloodborne's so good.
they they had Sekiro was much more about very quick responses and being very kind of fast in how you react to things. Wolong's a little bit like that, that it's very much about very precise timing. Like, for example, one of the things that initially threw me about Wolong was that all the kind of combat buttons were mapped to the face rather than the shoulder buttons. And
Oh,
at first, I thought, why have they done that? That's a little bit weird because I'm going to have to go and relearn how to play Souls games, basically. But soon enough, it became pretty obvious why, because the shoulder buttons, the length of time it takes to press a shoulder button is way too long for the speed at which the combat in this game works. Like if you're not pressing a button within, you know, a fraction of a second to do a counter or to dodge out of the way or whatever, then you're in trouble in Wolong. It's that fast, which is interesting.
well,
I
I don't know if I can
I
do that anymore.
I think you'll get along with it, Alan. Like you like Bloodborne, so it's just
Yeah, I'm a
imagine Bloodborne,
psychopath.
but a little bit faster. I think you'll enjoy it. And they've streamlined a lot of other things. Like the leveling up system is just 5 different stats now. Um, and those
Hmm.
stats have a whole bunch of different implications. So you don't have to. It's not like Elden Ring where you've got so many different stats to manage within your character. This one's quite streamlined and it's designed to be much more pacey and actiony and stuff. And it tells a pretty good
Sounds a
tape.
lot more enjoyable than like a whole complex like it's not Dungeons and Dragons. You don't have to do all the stats for your character and like 2 hours later not even start the game. Like you should be able to be into the game. It should be fun and fast paced and
Well, you'll spend ages
actiony.
designing your character because, like all Koei Tecmo games, the character designer is intricate and in depth, and you can make some pretty interesting characters, which you can't
Can I
do
make the
from
most
software.
crooks looking man in the world? Can I make him look awful?
You
Can
can
I
make them
make
look
an
awful.
ogre but also made out of onions?
You can make
Can
them look
he?
awful if you want to, but you know
Can they be pink?
that's more for from software games. I never liked their character creators because everything you
Well,
created looked ugly as a result in the end anyway.
Just use the Saints Row character creator in every game.
But
That was
yeah,
pretty
exactly. This is what
horrible.
I've been saying for years. It's been my plan for years is to make every game look absolutely awful.
but yeah,
It's how it has to be.
Wolong is definitely a good example of a not from software company doing a Souls like pretty well. The other one that I find myself recommending to a lot of people these days is Still Rising, which is a
The
really
weird French
impressive.
game.
Yeah,
I love weird French games. They should make more
French.
of them.
It's the French Revolution, but with robots, which is pretty cool. Still Rising is
Like
actually a really neat game. I think that it didn't get the attention it deserved when it released. But
that is because it's Eurojank, and that's just the
well,
curse of the Eurojank.
I think people went in assuming that it was going to be like all the other Spiders games because the developer Spiders is very much a Eurojank developer. They did Greedfall, for example, which is probably the
A
most
great
prominent one,
game.
but also Technomancer, Mars, Warlogs, and a bunch of other games. And they've always been that Eurojank kind of RPG thing. They've never done a Souls-like. I think a lot of people thought that Steel Rising was going to be a Eurojank rather than a Souls-like. Um, I did.
It
And
is
then I
pretty
got into it and I
Eurojanky.
was like, what? Hang on, this is a Souls-like. And I was very impressed with it. But yeah,
For some reason,
what
I'm imagining you playing that game and being like, "What's the deal with this?" Like,
I thought
side job thing.
I seriously thought it was going to be like Greedfall. Like I was expecting it to be Greedfall-ish, where you created a character and you went through an open world game more like Dragon Age than Dark Souls, and it just wasn't. And it confused me at first But then I got into it and I was like, yeah, this is a good job, guys. You've impressed me, surprised and impressed and delighted me. I was delighted. But Alan,
I just love that sort of stuff.
what
I love weird shit.
to you, what makes a Souls game good? Like if you were playing a third party developer's Soulslike or third party and not FromSoftware Soulslike, what kind of criteria do you think would you're looking for to affect it, so that you could say that the developer's done a good job in kind of emulating what FromSoftware's done?
I think the only thing that's important for me is that sense of control. It's you have control, but you don't have full control. So it's the difference between a Souls-like and a Devil May Cry game is that when you hit a button, you are committing to that button. Whereas in a more character action game, it's about hitting that button and you can hit 17 other buttons to cancel into other things. Basically, it's what I would say is the difference between Third Strike and like a Marvel versus Capcom game. You know what I mean? It's more
Actually, to be honest, I really don't.
Okay, so MVC pretty full on. You can do a lot of cancels, a lot of cool stuff with assists. In Third Strike, it's very methodical. You have to like plan each attack, but also you can do some really, really cool stuff in it. Third Strike is more Soulsy. This is what I'm trying to say. Anyway, it's all about that sense of control. As far as I'm concerned, some developers overcompensate and think that Souls-like means slow and just like gelatinous, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And if anyone here has played the like Lords of the Fallen, a game that is so hugely misunderstood what makes Souls games fun, they will know immediately what I'm talking about. Because that game has the issue where if you hit R1, which is a fast attack, it takes about 14 seconds for that animation to play out, and that's not interesting. I mean, my belief is still that Bloodborne is the best Souls game, even with Elden Ring being Elden Ring. I think Bloodborne is probably the most well designed, well thought out, because it is quick, it is full on, but it's also slow. It's the best sort of mix of both worlds, where you can play it slowly, but it encourages you to play faster and not use a shield. To the point, there's a really good video essay by a YouTuber called H1 Guy, which looks at why Bloodborne is so good. And it's the idea that taking away the shields actually makes the game better. And I think that a lot of developers, particularly in the West, see the generic Dark Souls man with a sword and a shield, and they think, oh, okay, we're going to make this a game about hiding behind a shield, which is the most uninteresting and boring way you can play that game. I think the closest, funnily enough, is a game that I make fun of a lot, Code Vein, because that game is very, very fast and it plays off of that a bit more than other Souls games. I mean, I'm not going to talk about Neo because Neo is the fastest game of all time and it's very full on, and I love it because of that.
You
but
think
it's
Neo's
still a bit
fast?
too much for me.
Man. If you think Neo's
I
fast,
can't. No, I'm not going to play it. I'm not going to play Wolong.
you got nothing. I mean, Wolong's so much faster than Neo.
I'm not going to play that game. It's
Like
too much for me already.
That game will absolutely own you.
I just think that's the thing, is that people think that Souls equals slow, when Souls is actually about going fast, but thinking before you go fast.
I think it's like
which is
it's about the control of the pace, right? That
yeah,
the pace is deliberate. Whatever pace they set it at is that pace for a reason, and the whole experience is kind of built around that. So, the Souls games, for example, or Elden Ring, are slower paced, but that pacing is very deliberate for the experience and the kind of atmosphere that they're trying to sell. Whereas the Bloodborne is trying to be a bit more brutal, it's trying to be more visceral in terms of its feeling and the atmosphere. So it is a little bit faster. And then Sekiro is very much about speed, and they've made sure that the whole experience is built around that constant sense of speed and movement. So yeah, I think a lot of those non-developers do misunderstand that they've kind of tried to calibrate an atmosphere or an experience, and the speed at which the game moves is not quite at that. And I think that's probably my problem with the Surge, that
Yeah, the
like
Surge has a big issue with that too.
the Surge felt to me from memory, and it's been a while since I played the Surge, but the Surge always I felt like there was a disconnect between how fast the action was and how fast the game was moving, and the kind of the atmosphere that the game was trying to sell on me. So yeah, I feel like the Surge probably could have done with being faster. I think it was a bit kind of trying to be a bit Souls speed rather than, it probably should have tried to be a bit more like Bloodborne or one of the faster ones.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me who noticed that. Because the biggest issue I had with the Surge One was that it was still two Lords of the Fallen. It still had moments of you having to be the slowest man of all time.
Mhm.
And I'm an idiot, and I play the big guts berserk sword basically in every one of those games because I like big man go slam. Um, but
Like I can
it
enjoy
was
a
just it was impossible. It was impossible in the Surge because if you use a big sword, you just die. You just too slow.
like I can
And it's not
enjoy
interesting.
a Souls like that is slow if it is deliberately done that way. Like the whole experience is designed around that. Mortal Shell, for example, is a really good example of that. That game
The game
is,
is so cool.
it feels like you're moving through molasses sometimes. Like it is a very slow and very deliberately paced Souls like. But again, the experience is kind of built around that. The atmosphere is very, very much kind of downbeat and kind of uh thick. To me, it was like the the section of Never Ending Story where the horse dies. It's a
Oh, in
weird
the
it
pile of goo.
yeah, it's that kind of weird association I have between the game and that movie. But yeah, that kind of atmosphere of very kind of melancholic and downbeat, and I felt like the action being quite slow suited that for Mortal Shell. So I'm not against
Yeah,
slower paced Souls, but only if that's deliberate. That's the point of it. Otherwise, yeah,
exactly. Like, why would I play a game that is just a Souls game but worse? You know what I mean?
yeah, because the Souls games are always paced perfectly for what they're trying to do. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so definitely the speed. The other thing that I think a lot of developers get wrong is the way that the stories are told, um, because everybody knows that From Software's stories are kind of told through items, and they're obscure, and like the main narrative is relatively thin, but there's all that lore that's behind it, and piecing together the story as you go along is a big part of the point of the games. I think a lot of developers really misunderstand how to do that well, because it's hard to tell a story that
Yeah.
way. And you don't have
I
to
think a
do it, I
lot.
think is the point. Like you don't have to go that way and still have an effective Souls game. I don't think the Neo games did it. Like the Neo games are very much a linear narrative, for the most
From
part.
point A to point B and
Yeah,
kill
and
shit. Yeah.
tell stories via cutscenes and very traditional ways of telling the game story. And they didn't feel the need to have every piece of equipment have pages of lore that you needed to read through. But if you do that wrong, if you're going to go that Souls way and do that wrong, then you're just going to bore the living hell out of players, because
Oh yeah.
who wants to read lore that's not interesting? And the only reason that people care about the
Yeah.
lore of the Souls games is because it's fundamentally interesting and well written. But a lot of lesser developers don't quite get that.
I mean, my biggest example of that is, I mean, as a school teacher, show don't tell. And if you're going to tell, tell it bloody well. Like
Yes.
it's a lot of video game writers are not given the time, they're not given the budget to actually write something proper good. And if they are given that time and budget, it's often now you need to explain how they're in a volcano. Oh, they've gone from the volcano, they're now in an iceland. Explain that, write that. And I'm sorry, but like realistically, there's no way. You can't do that. And a writer needs to be involved from the start. And I think that's why Souls succeeds, is because the writing team is on board from the get-go. They know what they're working with, and it's not just a case of them getting sent a document saying, right, now you're gonna like talk about how this place is connected to this place. They actually know about the places beforehand and they're building it up, and the world design reflects that. That's
Yeah,
why
and
Bloodborne, I think, is so successful.
I think that's kind of why Elden Ring was successful as well. I don't know. We've joked about George R.R. Martin's involvement with Elden Ring on the podcast in the past, but what I mean, his role in that was to write the kind of backstory, right? And
He
that
wrote
was
little
done.
like items and stuff.
Yeah, and that was done right at the start, so it was integrated within the experience. It wasn't like they had the basic, they had the world, and then sent the writer a Excel sheet and said fill these cells in with bits of narrative. Um, and yeah, it's difficult because I would have no idea how to kind of approach that approach to storytelling, because for me the thing is, if you can't assume that the audience is going to see that bit of lore or narrative, um, how do you make sure that they still have a understanding of what's going on, if that makes sense?
Yeah. How can you confirm that they're actually going to be engaged with
Well,
the story to begin with?
how can you be sure
Like,
that if for example, if you were to try and do this approach to this kind of software approach to storytelling, and you had a lot of critical lore kind of built into the items, what is the player's experience if they don't pick up a particular item, or they don't go to a particular area, don't fight a particular boss? If they miss parts of the lore, do they still have that complete narrative? And I think a lot of lesser games struggle with that, if
Matt,
that
you're going
makes
to hate me
sense.
for this. You're going to hate me. I think that's the issue with FF13. I genuinely think that's the exact issue with FF13. If you go into that game and you read all the stuff and you understand what's happening, it's probably great. But it's hidden behind a document. And I
I,
think that's a lot of the issue that a lot of modern Souls-like games also have.
I'm trying to think where Final Fantasy 13 had that, because
Like all the encyclopedia thingy that you had to read to understand the key terms.
right. No,
Yeah,
it's a
because that
little
was
bit,
where I got turned off.
it's a
Because
little bit
that's you're describing exactly the same thing that switched me off that game, whereas I just didn't understand what was happening because I didn't understand events that had happened previously that the game expected me to understand because the characters knew it. What you're
right.
describing now is much the same. And I think that's really interesting because it's a similar weakness. I think the sequel to FF13, like the 13.2, was much better at that because it didn't leave you blind without reading.
Right.
This is a weird link to make, but yeah. Am I
Well, I
making
mean,
sense?
yeah, I mean, I don't have that recollection of Final Fantasy 13, to be honest, but I'll take you. It's been ages since I played it, so I'll take your word for it. Um,
Yeah,
but yeah, I mean,
it's more like the use of words like Falsi and Elsie and Lassie and all that sort of stuff, and then incorporating past events about the world that's not shown to you but read to you. But I didn't have to want to read it because it didn't grab me immediately, which is where then the game became boring to me.
right,
Which I think is then a limitation of like the Souls games that are not FromSoftware.
right. Yeah, I mean, like I said, I just don't have that recollection
I
of Final
hope I
Fantasy
make
13. But
sense.
I mean, the point I was making was more that, with the good Souls with From Software, and the way that they do their games, if you miss parts of the lore, you don't miss understanding what's going on with the game. And I think that's difficult to do, um, well, because I feel like the lesser Souls games either, um, well, they tend to put lore into the stuff, assuming that you're going to find it, and if you don't pick up the item, if you don't go to a certain area, if you miss a document or whatever, then you've missed critical pieces of information, and then you don't have the full story anymore. Or alternatively, they pack it with a whole lot of nonsense that doesn't add anything to the experience as well, because then they are assuming that you're not going to, well, they don't have the assumption that you're going to find the items, so they only kind of fill it with filler material as such. I feel like
Yeah.
actually doing that non-linear storytelling where you don't have any kind of, you can't, as the writer, have the expectation that the player is going to experience a piece of lore or storytelling. I think that's very difficult to do as a creative exercise. And
It's insane. It's like writing a book, but you're blind
yeah,
because you can't guarantee what people are going to see. It's insane.
yeah, it's very difficult. And I think that the developers that are not from software that tend to do it well are the ones that don't try and do that. Koei Tecmo, in all of its Souls-like games, doesn't do that. They basically just tell a linear story as though it was just a standard RPG. Another good example, not just Neo, but Strangers of Paradise.
Stranger
The
of
fun,
Paradise, which is
yeah,
also probably the best Souls-like.
it's an excellent game, and one of the reasons it is excellent is it doesn't try and do the lore thing. It just gives you a cutscene at the start of the level, gives you a cutscene when you defeat the boss, and just tells a very linear
It's happy with
story.
that.
Yeah, it didn't need the lore thing to work as a Souls-like, and I think that's probably the better approach for these third parties who don't have the writing skills of a Miyazaki and his team.
Yeah. Trent, out of interest, you don't like Souls
Yes.
games. What is it a story-based thing that you don't like, or is it the gameplay as well?
Probably a bit of both. I think with especially more Elden Ring, I just found that it was not necessarily that you were had no direction. Like I like games like Breath of the Wild. You don't really have a direction where you need to go, so that's not necessarily the issue I had. But I feel like it just seemed a bit how it was trying to convey what the game actually wanted me to do seemed a bit rough. Like anything where it's like, oh, we'll go and view this lore. It just seemed a bit like the floating. There was like the items and all that sort of stuff. Like I just felt like I needed to see that, but how the game was telling me that I needed to see that just seemed a bit eh. And then I also found that the gameplay in terms of like, the boss battles and stuff like that, I was constantly dying and then I had to level up and I wasn't really leveling up correctly. And then I ended up finding a way to like warp to the end of the game to like grind and yeah, so I just thought it was a very grindy game if you wanted to actually feel like you're hitting through enemies and actually making progress through the game quickly. Like otherwise if you're playing the game you're going to be basically going over and over an enemy, and that's the whole point, is that essentially you die and then you go back and then you kill a few more and then you get a few more points and then you die again and then you yeah, so I just feel like I need to progress a little bit more in the game and feel like the game is helping me actually achieve things to actually feel like it's valuable for my time. Otherwise, I feel like I'm just like playing the same 5 minutes of the game and not really getting anywhere. And with time so valuable, why do I want to play the same 5 minutes of a 40-hour game kind of thing? So.
Out of interest, did you know that to experience the story, you had to read the item descriptions?
Uh, I know, but I just
Like,
sort of
genuinely,
went
like, because I
in.
didn't know that
Yeah.
when I started as well.
No, yeah, no. I just went into it because everyone's like, oh, Elden Ring is like the best. Like, it's going to be like great because it's like, Dark Souls and all this other stuff. And I hadn't actually played any of the Dark Souls before. And then that was like literally my first Dark Soul style game. And it's like, this doesn't seem that great.
Because I honestly empathize with that because one of the first ever games that I ever reviewed as a game journalist back in the day was Dark Souls 2. And I had played a little bit of Dark Souls 1 at that point, but I went straight into Dark Souls 2 and tried to beat it for review because I was like, right, I need to, do a big old boy review. And I was slamming my head against the wall for like 45 hours and having the worst time. And it was very, very tough. And I understand exactly how you feel in that situation. I want you to go play Bloodborne.
Yes, I
Because
feel
that
like
game
listening to you explain
made
Bloodborne,
me
it
change.
seems probably more compatible with
No,
what I want it to be. Yeah.
it's more approachable because it is a bit faster and it is it's less cryptic. It's more like Cthulhu horror, which I think works in the style of storytelling a bit more anyway. Because it's not like tangible threats. It's just like weird, insane gothic shit, which I'm here for personally. So
Yeah,
I think there's a big limitation to that sort of stuff.
I don't know if I would recommend Bloodborne to Trent next.
You can give it a shot. That's what I got into.
Why can't there be a different genre of like Souls games, like a sci-fi or something like that?
Well, there is. There's
Or-
heaps.
The Surge.
There's a
There's a
Surge
Surge,
or
yeah.
Hellpoint or Dolmen. There's heaps of sci-fi Souls games.
With a
I
lot
reckon-
of sci-fi.
I reckon the one you want to try, Trent, is probably Sekiro or
Yeah.
Strangers of Paradise. Stranger of Paradise is easier. So
It's a bit more bullshit, though.
you won't feel like you're getting stuck into replaying the same section over and over again because you're struggling to get your head around the combat. No, Stranger of Paradise has an easy mode too. So
it does have an easy mode, yeah. Fair
Easy
enough.
mode, yes. Awesome.
where I
Just
mean,
my gun.
Sekiro doesn't have that, but Sekiro actually tells a very straightforward story, which is, when you're not kind of into the Souls-like way of storytelling, then you can play that one, and it plays much like any other kind of action game that you would have played before. So you might find the story a bit more approachable for Sekiro. But yeah, I would not necessarily recommend Bloodborne until you're a little bit more comfortable with it, because it would suck if you. I mean, one of the biggest challenges with with Bloodborne is until you beat that first boss, you're absolutely screwed because you can't level up.
I don't think so.
You can't level up.
Oh yeah, okay. No, you're right. Yeah.
And
But
leveling
even
up
then,
is
like, it's
my
not that bad.
biggest. My biggest complaint is I can't level up to the point where I'm feeling like the game is hard. Yeah.
It took me a while to get past there's no way to grind yourself into a position where you can make that first boss easier. So if you're struggling with that first boss, then you're absolutely stuffed.
I don't want to be doing the same thing over and over again to like get to even comparable with the boss. Like I just want to get to the boss, defeat the boss, next boss. Like,
well, yeah.
When you get into the groove of Bloodborne, you will enjoy that. Genuinely, like as someone who started with Bloodborne properly, like that was the first game I actually probably enjoyed. Yeah, that's the one you want. It's very Neo-y as well, because Neo, you can kind of just like throw yourself at a wall for a bit until you find a bit of gear that you actually like and then go with it. Neo is really good for that, actually, because it is so liberal with its gear in general.
Yeah, I never thought. I can't remember ever getting too stuck in Neo.
No, it's full on, but it's never like impossible.
Yeah, I never felt the need to kind of grind as such, because I never got that stuck in Neo. I mean, it was difficult, but you were able to learn the boss's patterns and stuff just from a couple of attempts, and getting up to them was never. Yeah, it was difficult without ever feeling like it was going to be a grind.
It wasn't bullshit.
Wolong is something else entirely. I'm looking forward to seeing people's opinions on this game, because I think it might be a little bit more divisive than Neo. I think the pace is going to really bother some people. And
yeah, but in all honesty, Souls-like games are always going to bother a lot of people.
Well, true, it will bother some people. And the other thing is, I think the difficulty of Wolong is not as well balanced, perhaps. The first boss took me like 70 attempts to get past, because he just absolutely brutalizes you, and he's a 2-stage boss as well. So it took me maybe 15 attempts to get him through his first health bar, and then he just kind of levels up and converts into an even nastier guy for his second round. That very first boss took me ages to get past, and then after that it settles into something that's much easier for quite some time, and then it hits another difficulty spike. So yeah, I think the uneven difficulty of Wolong might bother some people, and the pacing will definitely do so. But I do think the narrative is really well told, and it's an interesting take on Three Kingdoms China. So people who like Dynasty Warriors will probably find something of interest there too, the way that they've approached the story this time around. So yeah, it'll be interesting. It's going to be very interesting.